Okay, well, I'd like to officially welcome everyone to Designing Your Life with Your Digital Brain. This is a special Big Thinker presentation of self-discovery, and I'm really pleased to introduce Omer Aziz. He's a GTD practitioner, international HR executive. Some of you have seen some of his past webinars. Some of you maybe even downloaded some of his template brains. Omer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Shelley.
And I also, before we get started, want to introduce another familiar face, Matt Caton, our Director of Customer Solutions, who will be moderating the Q&A. And for those of you that just joined and might have missed my preamble, we do have a very active Q&A throughout the session. Omer is more than happy to take all kinds of interesting questions on his very elaborate brain. So utilize that Q&A to participate in the session. We'll try and chat back immediately and also highlight key questions for the rest of the group as well. And I think with that, Omer, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Shelley. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Looks good. I can see a lot of wonderful thought type colors and the
Excellent.
blue background.
And then I just need to minimize. There we go. So are we ready to go?
I think so. I think we're ready to go. This is going to be a real treat, everyone. Stay in your seats. We're going into Designing Your Life with Omer Aziz.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Shelley. And I have to admit, I've really been looking forward to this. I'm very excited to walk you through my interpretation of this book. I think it's an excellent book called Designing Your Life: How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life, and it's by the authors are two professors who teach at Stanford, and it's one of the most popular courses at Stanford, Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And as I started reading the book, I found it very appealing to the engineer side of me, and I think this book is very, very helpful in terms of helping you think about what you want to do for the rest of your career. In terms of what we'll cover today, I'll kind of walk through my summary and interpretation of the book. I'll show some of the tools that are in the book and why I think the tools are so well suited for personal brain. I found the two together were extremely powerful for me to have ideas on what I want to be working on. And not only will I show you the tools, but I'll show you examples, and they're my examples. Each tool kind of builds on whatever you uncovered from the previous tool. So the best way to show that is through examples. And as I'm doing that, hopefully I'll be able to kind of cover the new features of Personal Brain 10, which I'm still getting to know them, but I'm finding them very, very useful, very helpful in generating ideas. And hopefully some of the things that I touch on in this webinar will be proof of that. So let me get started. Firstly, you'll see these thoughts which are pinned at the top, and it's kind of my dashboard. So the more comfortable I become with the book or whatever aspect of the book I want to work on, I can jump into that immediately. If I've been away from this this brain for a while and I'm not sure where to start, I typically create guiding principles, which are my kind of key takeaways from the book. And so if I'm not sure where to start, I always just start right there. And I number them, and because I number the thoughts, they present in order, and I just start at thought number one. So I think one of the key aspects of this book is that designers don't think their way forward, they build their way forward. And what that means is they create prototypes, and the faster you can create a prototype and the faster you can collect data from that prototype, the more ideas you get. And so you'll see I've got a thought here around creating prototypes. And this is kind of a reminder for me when I'm stuck on what I want to do next, that this prototype image here is a symbol that I'm overthinking and I should just try something. And you'll know you're on the right track when you start having ideas that start to become a little generative. And it's almost that kind of feeling of synergy where you have two ideas and they create this third idea that you find really exciting. So I have an image for that kind of reminds me, I'll know I'm on the right track when when ideas are coming to me as opposed to me feeling like I need to think of ideas. And this is a very interesting concept in that don't start with a problem, start with the point of view. That's probably element number one of design thinking, is that don't be in the middle of the problem. Try to have a perspective that allows you to look at that problem. And if you can take on other people's perspectives, especially users involved in the problem, you'll actually start to see that your description of the problem starts to change. And then once you've got an idea of that problem, just start brainstorming like crazy and start prototyping like crazy. And for me, this is the symbol for brainstorming. I like to brainstorm kind of with a blank sheet of paper and then just see what comes to me. And this was another key takeaway for me from the book, is that the authors suggest that you shouldn't try to do what you're passionate about, kind of chase your passion, so to speak. Instead, they suggest flipping that formula and do a bunch of different things. And as you do different things, you'll discover things that you're passionate about, that you actually didn't realize you're passionate about. And once you discover those things, then try to have more ideas around those things. So I found this guiding principle really important and helpful for me. So where do you start? Well, you basically start where you are. And so this is kind of my "you are here" symbol. And in terms of starting where you are, you have a dashboard that involves health, love, play, and work. And if you can get an accurate gauge of how satisfied you are in each of those areas, and that starts to give you an idea of what kinds of problems you want to try to solve. Now, when I was thinking about how to do this gauge within personal brain, what I thought I would do is try to create a bit of a gas gauge. And I found this on the web, and it's kind of a site that shows you how to actually build a gas gauge using PowerPoint. So I got excited by that, put it right into my brain, which is very easy to do, especially with the brain box, which I'll show in a second. And I started building a kind of a gas gauge, which I also have in here. And it's funny because this is one of those things where prototyping is good to do, because when I started building my own and I looked at them, a couple of things came to mind. First of all, I didn't really like them. I don't like my color choices. I don't think it's getting across what the dashboard was designed to do. So I did enough here to realize this isn't the way I want to go. So then I thought, okay, well, if the whole point is to get a reading of how satisfied you are in those areas, I thought I'll create tags. And the tags are color coded and they go into eighths of a tank. And so now these tags allow me to look at my dashboard. And if I look in the area of health, for example, here are all the thoughts I've had around, what contributes to my health. And I just kind of rattled off all of these thoughts as they came to me. And sometimes they come to me later and then I put them in here. I see I have a typo here. So I probably had too much coffee when I did this one. And so let me just fix my typo. And then after I've come up with all these thoughts, I can easily decide where I stand on that thought from a gauge perspective. And so, for example, aging parents. So I'm very, very fortunate. I have both of my parents. They're in good health. My dad's 93. My mother's 80. And so although, my parents are on my mind, I feel like I'm 7/8 full because they're both in good health. So I feel extremely fortunate that way. So I kind of went through each of my areas around health and then gave them a gas gauge rating. And once you're looking at this, everything becomes explicit in your awareness and you're able to give your health a full rating. And so again, when I looked at I'm 7/8 full, half full, 7/8 full, I kind of consolidated all and said, okay, when it comes to health, I think I'm 3/4 full. as things change and I start to do more things and the rating on the gauge needs to change, I can easily change it by just right-clicking on the tag and then change the state if it starts to, if I don't feel 3/4 full is accurate anymore. So I can change the tag that easily. And if I do that across the 4 areas of my dashboard, I start to get a good sense of what problems I'm going to work on. So if I look at work, here are the different thoughts that came to my mind when it comes to work. So full-time role in the field of HR. So right now I'm not doing a full-time role in the field of HR. So if I give that a tag, I might give it something like 1/8 full because I'm not doing a full-time work. Now, this is a really interesting example of picking the problems you're going to want to solve is one of the most important things that you can do, because at first, when I look at this gauge, I might think, okay, I should focus on finding a full-time role in the field of HR, as opposed to doing many of the other things I like to do. The other way to look at that, though, is maybe I want to start doing a whole bunch of other things and never have a full-time role in the field of HR. Maybe I'll do 5 or 6 or 7 different things, some of them involving HR, some of them involving other things. So just looking at your gauge really started to influence me on what some of the things are that I want to focus on in terms of problems. You'll notice the webinar we're doing today is in my work dashboard, and I gave it a full tank because that's how excited I feel about presenting this webinar. So this is kind of a good start to getting where you're at. I find tags very useful on capturing the state of my satisfaction. And if I look at love, I haven't given a full gauge here, but if I look at all these things, you know, love to spend more time with the people that I love. That's why I gave it 1/4 full. Feel very fortunate that I have a long list of strong people in my life, but again, a relatively low rating because I just don't feel like I spend enough time with them. Okay. So if I was to look at all of this and give love a rating, I would probably give it something like this. So now this is starting to help me, again, become a little more focused on what problems I want to solve. On work, if I was to give a rating to everything, I would say from a work perspective, I'm feeling at least 3/4 full. So again, I like the dynamic nature of tags and how fast I can change them. For me, and everyone's preference is different, but for me, I like using thought types representing a family, kind of a family of thoughts that belong to each other. And I like using tags to represent a state. And a state is one of those things that's a little more temporary that can change. So I change on the fly with tags, and then I categorize my thoughts with types. Shelley, any questions or any thoughts before I continue?
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating. Your rating system is very intriguing. So just a couple questions there. First of all, in terms of your approach, this is a very detailed example, of using the brain to really design and control and to get a level of consciousness on your life that I don't even know how you do that other than by such an intricate mapping. Can you give us like the background and maybe the beginning, dare I say the Archimedean point? Like, how do you get started on this? Like, this looks like a well-oiled machine, and hats off to you, Omar, for getting all this in the brain and then coming up with your amazing rating system, which I have a question on that for you too as well. But can you maybe just take us back to how the driving need to do this that you yourself and maybe some of the people you've worked with have experienced. Why did you start doing this, and how has it helped you? And what was the beginning section? Was it that love section, the people in your life, or something like completely different, like that cool car design that you showed us earlier?
Okay. So a few different questions in there, and I'll try to
Yes.
answer them.
I'm guilty of multiple questioning. I would
No,
make a horrible proxy, but anyway, yes. Go pick any of the above.
no problem at all. So the dashboard is the first tool that's recommended in the book. And again, it's this whole idea. You can't stress enough about knowing where you are before you decide where to continue. So that is kind of a tenet. And very simply, and health kind of underlies all of the other ones, as you know, Shelley, right? If your health
Right.
isn't in kind of top state, the other ones get compromised.
So true.
Not only do they get compromised, but in many ways you can't even focus on them. So health is probably the most important. And what I found, the way I started first is I just listed on a piece of paper all the things that came to my mind when it came to my health, and I started listing them. And then it's very easy to go from that list and bring it into your brain. And again, you just create a thought called health. Originally, this is a thought. You'll notice, my dashboards was a thought. I then changed my mind and made it a type. And all I did was I brought in the areas that I had written on the piece of paper. But now that they're in here, and this gas gauge that I walked you through when I was playing around with how do I actually want to show this, to show you how easy it is to kind of change things on the fly with the brain. It's complimentary of you to say that it's a well-oiled brain, but you can really change on the fly very quickly. So these gauges, as late as last Friday, this was my approach. And so changing my mind from gauges to using tags, color-coded tags, this is something I decided on Friday, was able to build these in about 5 or 10 seconds. And then when I look at my dashboard now, it's just fundamentally changed how I can assess. So this well-oiled machine kind of was built out of a few ideas in a day or two.
Wow, so it's really an evolution, which makes a lot of sense, because that's how some of my brains over the years have evolved. Now, could we go back to that gauge thought, because that is a very interesting concept that I think we want to dive into a little deeper. I love the graphics, and then so what you've done is you've really decided on a metric of, is this your emotional well-being or how you're feeling, and then this metric is applied as a thought type to key aspects of your life. Is that correct? Or how would you, let's dive a little deeper into what say 1/8 full would mean versus empty is empty. If you lose a project, I don't necessarily want to dive into the negative though, but how do you decide? Because this is something that I like this idea of doing this, but I'd love to understand why there's 8, and if you could take us a little deeper into your metrics for gauging
Sure.
How you're feeling about some of these things.
Sure. And again, I think the credit for all of this really goes to the authors of the book, and I think they've thought through this for many years. So the gas gauge analogy.
So this is in the book, and that's where I guess I'm sorry, I haven't read the entire book. So the gauges are something that the authors actually is in the book. So if we want to learn more about what these gauges mean, we can actually read the book, Designing Your Life, and then this is your implementation of it. Okay.
Yeah. Now, what I will say, and I do highly recommend reading the book. What I will say is that the beauty of these gauges is half full or quarter full or full. By design is your subjective assessment. There is no universal definition for a full tank. A full tank is what you consider to be a full tank when it comes to any of these areas, and that's actually the beauty of it. And the more I thought about this, if I look at this one again, the reason it showed up here is because it's a potential stress area. But the more I thought about it, what is my subjective state at the moment around this area? It's actually 7/8 full. So the gas gauge, and this here, seeing 2 tags on this, is actually just a mistake I'd made. I wanted to change my mind from one to the other, but I left both, but it's easy to remove. So it's your subjective assessment on where you stand against that item. And when it comes to designing your life, your subjective assessment is really all that matters. So does that answer that question, Shelley?
Yeah, it does. And then ideally, once you have all these assessments, I know that designing your life is used for people in any phase of their life. Of course, in Stanford, it's a lot of students who are trying to decide what to do, but people who are on the verge of retiring are using this. So I guess what I'm wondering with these gauges, if let's say I put all these things in my life and I have these different gauges of how full I am, how then would I go about drawing a conclusion on what to do with my life? And maybe I'm not supposed to do that again, and I'm just kind of asking questions that are popping up. And how have you used these gauges to kind of make decisions and sort of forge different paths forward in your own personal life?
Well, that's a beautiful, beautiful lead in terms of, what they suggest doing next, which is where I'll take us to. And I think one comment I'll make is don't, and this is the whole idea of design thinking and prototyping. Don't make decisions that you're imagining you're going to do for the next 15 or 20 or whatever large number of years. Just try to focus on the problems you want to solve. So the gas gauge tells you where, kind of points you in the direction of where the problems you want to solve are. So as you can see, this is some quarter full, and love is something that's on my mind. And although work is 3/4 full, if I think about this, that's on my mind. So it starts to kind of isolate the areas that you want to work on problems on. And so as you're deciding what problems you want to work on, there's kind of 5 design mindsets as you think about a problem. And I think the other beauty of design thinking and prototyping is as you prototype and as you think about the problem, you will find that the problem itself will fundamentally pivot, and you'll start trying to solve different problems than the problem you originally thought. In fact, one of the things that they mention in the book is what you have in your mind problem, what you think the problem is, may not be the real problem. So using the design mindsets helps you actually define the right problem, which is kind of the next step. Is that helpful on that question,
Okay.
Shelley?
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And I'll we do have more questions, but I'll let you go ahead and continue through more of your tour, and then more will pop up as we continue.
Okay. So one of the things I will mention while I'm looking at the design mindsets, one of the ideas I might try, and again, it makes it very easy to try with the brain, is I might actually, instead of, let's look at be curious. Instead of having be curious be a thought, as you can see, I've color coded the thought. What I might do is I might actually convert it to a type. And now that it's a thought type, it will kind of trigger me to, if I'm trying to solve a problem, create be curious thoughts in that problem I'm trying to solve. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if I go to my dashboard and I go conversations, and so one of the people I'd love to have more conversations with or spend more time with is my daughter, Saraya. And so maybe right here, I'll think about how can we combine what Saraya loves with what I love. So maybe this is an example of a being curious mindset. So by making the mindsets thought types, I can actually make sure that I go through each of the types, if you see what I mean. So I might actually use these as types instead of thoughts themselves, and then they'll make me go through the thought process.
Excellent. And I see that sometimes you have attachments with the presentation. So your daughter, Saraya, for instance, do you have this as a separate brain, or is this part of a larger brain? Like, would you also include in this links to stuff you might buy to Saraya for holidays on Amazon, or do you keep that brain separate? Like when you have the people in this brain, are you, you know how and maybe I'm making assumptions because in my brain, I have my family and I love that. And I have all kinds of things from their health to like our vacation plans to, oh, this is a cool thing. I'm going to get them on Amazon for their birthday. So I'm just wondering if you recommend any level of hygiene, dare I say, for adding stuff into the brain, or, and I guess it's subjective, but, you know, seeing your daughter in there, I can imagine you have a number of thoughts on her that maybe you're not showing for today that may or may not be in your brain.
Well, I've gone back and forth. I started using TheBrain, I think it was in 2008, I think. So I've been using it for quite a few years now. And at first I had separate brains for different aspects. And then very quickly, actually, I decided to have one digital identity. So I have one brain that is my complete digital identity. I do everything from that one brain. And that one brain, I think, has about 45 or 50,000 thoughts. And in there is everything.
Nice.
Everything
Excellent.
for my daughter. Now, this brain that we're looking at here is a brain I specifically created for this webinar around the book.
Right, of course.
And so this one's a separate one. But if I was to, but I personally, I mean, it comes down to a matter of choice. I personally don't have multiple brains. This is kind of my teaching brain. All of this that you see here is in my 45,000 thought brain. And on that brain, if I had pulled up Soraya, all kinds of things would have presented around Soraya that you don't see here.
Right. Okay. And so that's a good point to users, that we're going from the theory of this book and very high level analysis to also very practical things. Like if you have someone in your brain and you're doing a project with them, you're going to drag and drop that file or document next to their name or make that link online. So in these types of brains, you can, you know, the theory merges with the reality and the daily grind of getting things done as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you'll notice the other thing that I mentioned at the beginning is it's very easy to get into the middle of your brain, kind of like we are here, and almost lose where you are. And so that's why having this dashboard here for me is very, very helpful. And also this home button. If I'm ever in doubt and I just hit the home button, I'm back to the beginning of you know, kind of the top of my brain. And then I can very easily establish wherever we were at, because I have this kind of guiding principle breadcrumb trail. And so another piece of advice, and I really enjoyed this one actually, is one of the things you have to be careful of is what's called success disaster. And again, full credit to Dave and Bill on this term. Success disaster is one of those things where you have an ability, you're good at something, you might spend 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, maybe even 10, maybe even your whole career doing that thing, but you actually really don't like it. And so you're successful at it, but you hate it. And you have to be aware of success disaster because you could lose, you know, 10 years of your life. So I found that a really, really interesting concept as well. And basically what they're suggesting is sometimes if you have things that don't work out for you and they kind of almost blow up quickly, that's actually can be a trigger for you really to use that as a springboard to start doing the things that you love. So to me, this is a good reminder. If I'm starting to lean on, okay, well, I'm going to keep doing that because I know how to do it, it's safe, and let's say it makes me money. Well, beware of that, because 3 years down the road, you could find you really haven't moved much in the area. You haven't really designed your life much because of this. So I find that a useful reminder. And then you had the question about problems to work on. So one is that question I kind of asked before, and I'm going to just change this thought type right here now that I created be curious as a thought type. So here's a question. Here's another question. I play drums, and I haven't. I have to admit, when I thought about it, I hadn't played drums in 5 years, and for me, you know, that does kind of bother me, because on my on my play, there are things I love to do in terms of playing. Playing drums is one of them. I feel 1/8 full, but I honestly didn't know how I was going to find time to play drums if I look at my life. And so here's another interesting problem to start thinking about now is how am I going to play drums? And so something happened at work at our holiday party. I was asked if I want to play drums for our holiday party, and my immediate answer was no. And the reason I answered no is because, again, I just really don't have time to play drums. But now that I'd done this, I started thinking about it differently. And there's something the authors talk about, which is learn to see the difference between problems and gravity. And what they mean by that is gravity is one of those things you shouldn't view gravity as a problem because problems should be actionable. And with some very small exceptions, defying gravity is not really actionable. So you have to be able to tell the difference between problems and gravity. And one of my gravity areas is my commute. So my commute was almost an hour and 15 minutes to work each day. Now I've been asked if I want to play drums at the holiday party. I've got an hour and 15 minutes to actually be listening to songs, be reviewing a set list. And although I might not be able to drum on the train to work, I can certainly learn about the song to work. And so then this turned into this, which turned into this, which turned into this. And so you can see me on the left playing with a little drum machine. And not that I need to subject us to it, but every once in a while, I've got this link right in my brain. And again, here's a tangible example. There was a tangible example where gravity and a problem that was low on my dashboard turned into a prototype. And that, I would say, this only happened because I'm in the middle of reading Designing Your Life. So there's one example. I know I've kind of lost track.
Omer, to step backwards, so gravity, just for those of us who haven't read the book, would that be just defined as things in your life that are, I guess, in quotes, slowing you down? Because obviously a problem's a problem, but you mentioned the commute as an example of gravity, and I see may make more money. So gravity as defined in the book, or as you're using this term, is just how would you describe what gravity is in someone's life?
Yeah, gravity, Shelley, is not so much the gravity is slowing you down or pulling you in. The point of gravity is there's not much you can do about it. Gravity it is what it is. It's not really actionable. And so trying to solve problems of gravity are a case that are going to drive you insane because they're not very actionable. So I can't spend 100% of my time doing volunteer work in philanthropy because at this point in my life, one of the things that, is a true statement is I need to make money. This is also a true statement because people I love live in many different places. So gravity meaning I can't make everyone move into one place. So it's not things that slow you down. It's statements of it is what it is. So find ways to work around it. That's what gravity is.
Okay.
And so the commute, again, I never would have thought about getting ready to drum while I'm sitting on the train. I just never would have thought of it if it wasn't for, this concept. So does that answer your question about the difference between gravity and problem solving, Shelley?
Yes, it does. And it is a very helpful distinction. It's sort of like focus on the things I can change and the things I can't, let's see what I can do to, enhance my life. So
that's a very, very good way to put it. I'm going to take a note, and at some point I'll put that in the notes right here because that was a very good way to put it. And so another guiding principle again is be open-minded to accept reality and reframe a problem such that it's actionable. And so you'll see that I've got some prototypes, and prototype is actually a thought type. And we've already kind of gone through this one, and I'll talk about these other ones when we get to to that point. So if I move on to So right now I'm at 11. Let me go to 12. So the next step after you've kind of assessed your dashboard is to build your compass. And your compass is kind of a life view and a work view. And again, back to your earlier question, Shelley, this really just started with an email to myself where I wrote down my thoughts on my life view. And so, in fact, the notes I wrote are literally right here. So I took that email, I copied and pasted it here. So if I'm thinking how I want to build on my brain, this was an email I probably sent myself again on that train, the gravity train. And then I can take this thinking and bringing it into the brain. And I brought in this kind of icon to remind me. And here are 5 or 6 things that are my life view. For some reason, I've always had an interest in coincidences. I'm convinced there's something between coincidences and quantum physics. I just find the idea fascinating. Today's coincidence, for what it's worth, Shelley, is January 23rd. Today marks my 30th year in my career. I started at Bell Canada January 23rd, 1989. Love that coincidence. We didn't plan it that way.
Wow, congratulations.
Well,
that is great.
Thank you. So here's life view, and then your work view. And the reason they want you to, and do I have the notes here? No, I don't think I do. So I brought in the notes for life view, but I didn't for work view. And the reason they want you to create a life view and a work view is really to get at where the two might be in conflict. Because having coherence in your life is a key design principle. It's hard to design something if all the parts to it aren't coherent. So that's the point of this exercise.
And that's interesting too, because in our templates, even our basic My Brain template, we always instruct users to have a personal section and a business section in their brain. So I see how now but I've used it just to map out each, but to look at them as a total sum of where they're in conflict is a very interesting idea.
Well, and so if we now click on Build Your Compass, so what I did was I took my life view. If I hit Control and then left click here, I've copied all of the thoughts. I then go here, and then I can say link as children, which is what I've done. And so now, as you just mentioned, Shelley, you're looking at it combined together. And then I have a thought type called signs we got it right that I've had for many years, and signs we got it wrong. And that's where I'm now trying to identify clashes between my work view and my life view. And, here's an interesting class. Many of the things that I love to do that I would gladly do for free forever aren't paid. And remember, one of my gravity problems is I need to make money. So there's a potential class. This is another clash, which is kind of a personal development area in that if I'm not at my best, sometimes I can be a little irritable. So need to keep that in mind, especially back to the coffee, drinking too much coffee that I identified in my dashboard. And what was encouraging for me is there's quite a few areas where my work view and my life view is actually complementary. And so I'm trying to capture those elements that are complementary, because each of these tools, I think the authors designed each of these tools to have A, to build on each other, but B, some themes start to emerge. And those themes are what you're going to use to think about what other problems you want to try to solve. So this gives me a good sense of where I have coherence and some clashes I need to think about.
And we're seeing lots of colors in this area, and I assume these are your thought types. We spent a lot of time on your tags, but maybe you can give us some insight into some of the thought types. I'm seeing a lot of different thought types in this particular section, and that actually coincides with a question Pierre asked earlier. Omer, how do you choose to categorize your thoughts with types or tags? How do you organize them?
So that's a good question. So for me, types, again, represent a family or a categorization. So for example, life view is a perfect example of a type. And then when I'm looking at this whole section, I can easily see what are the life views, and I can easily see what are the work views because of my color coding. The pink versus blue, that's just going to be a personal preference. For me, blue is always represented work-like things, and pink is always represented, you know, kind of personal or family things. So I chose those two colors. In both cases, though, I use the same icon, which is the reminder that, you know, your compass as a whole should be coherent. So that's how I use types. And then I found that signs, we got it right, are useful in so many different areas in my brain, but it's a thought type that's been with me almost since I started using the brain. Because again, I can either use signs, we got it right, to envision a successful future or capture you know, the successful aspects of the past. So I try to use as much color as I can. I try to use as many icons as I can. The reason I do that is even before I start reading the words here, I have a sense, you know, only two clashes in my life view and work view. Even before I know what they are, I feel good about the fact there's only two of them. And I know that instantly. So that's how I use type. Now, in terms of tag, again, for me, a tag is a useful description of a state that may be temporary. And so workflow is a perfect example of that. I'll if I look at my tags here, so I might create a new tag called strategic next action. And now if I think about, let's say I'm here and I have a thought. I'm looking at the coincidences. I might be typing the book wrong, but let's say I need to reread this book. Well, I can just give this a workflow action, which tells me it's something I have to do. And so when I'm done, that tag is going to change. So again, tags for me represent temporary state. So here it's workflow. So now if I look at all the actions I have as a result of anything that's in this mind map, all I would need to do is go to tag, click on this, and they would all present. So for me, in a nutshell, thought types or category of thought, tags are reflection of a state that is probably temporary and easily changeable.
Right. And just to add to that, for some of the newer users on the call, a thought type, you can only have one thought type per thought, whereas tags, you can have, in this particular brain, looks like you're using mostly one or two, but you can have multiple tags per thought. So they're a little bit more fluid and incidental than a thought type, which tends to take on more of an objective, permanent quality to a particular thought.
And I think on that point, Shelley, in terms of where you can use two tags. So let's go to, if I look at playing drums, play drums at the holiday party. I might even give this the tag of this is one of those areas that's 1/8 full. And this is an action, right? Playing drums at the holiday party is an action. So now I've got both tags. So a reflection of two states. This is low in your tank. You're going to do something about it. Here's the something you're going to do. So that's how I would use multiple tags.
Nice. And then when you're on your compass section number 12, David wrote in, it looks like he can group children by color. Is that one way of keeping groups of children together? And so, David, that is organized by type. So the cool thing is, once you do set up all these thought types and you give them a nice color code, if you right click on the background, and I'll just let Omar go ahead and show you, you can set up your children to display to be organized by order or by type. And that's very nice for large groupings of information, as you can see in Omer's brain.
So life view is a type, and this is the beauty of linkable types, which I think is new for Personal Brain 10. But when I create a thought as a child of a thought type, it takes on the type instantly. So let's say I'm on a roll here, and I start having a bunch of, I have a spurt of ideas. Now, if you're wondering, these don't fit into life view, I'm just doing that part on the fly, so bear with me. But if I do that, they automatically get created with the type of their parent, which is very efficient, especially when you have multiple thoughts like I just did. And then if you're wondering, you can always go here, and if you click on a type, that type anywhere in your brain will present. Now it's already presenting here because although this looks like a thought, this is actually a thought type. Thought types are linkable, which is very, very powerful.
Great. Now, there are a few more questions on organization structure, but because we're getting close to the hour, maybe we should continue covering what more you want to cover in terms of the theory and what you've mapped out, and then when you've done that, then we'll turn around and finalize with the final Q&A. Great questions, lots of compliments on your colors and backgrounds, and we'll Matt's answering questions, and we'll circle back to more questions. I want to make sure we get through the bulk of the theory in your brain on designing your life.
Sure. So there's kind of three main tools left, Shelley, and considering the amount of time we have left, let me jump into those tools just so I can at least give you a little bit of a taste. So the next tool is you should create 3 mind maps as recommended in the book. And again, here's another reinforcement of why Personal Brain is so well suited for this. So the first mind map is create a mind map of when you were in flow. Look back at a time when you're in flow. And so for me, it was when I did my master's. And the reason I was in flow when I did my master's, hard to believe that I graduated my master's 32 years ago. It's flown. But I started writing all the reasons why, that put me in flow. And you can see all of these different reasons. And then, interestingly enough, I started some really, really good habits as I was doing my master's. And as I was mapping this, one of the memories that came to my mind, which came almost instantly, is I remember one time I was waiting for a printout by the printer at school. I was still at school. It was midnight. And while I was waiting for the printer, I was kind of doing push-ups beside the printer. And for some reason, this thought just came to me. It wasn't one of those thoughts I had. It came to me. And I think the reason it came to me is this is a perfect mini example of kind of when I was at my peak. Is here I am, doing something healthy, waiting for the results of my master's. It was kind of a perfect investment of time. It's a great little memory. And the authors refer to, in your mind map, pay attention to your third ring thoughts. And third ring is a conceptual item, but what they mean is when you're mind mapping, you're going to have several thoughts. And those are thoughts that you're kind of having. But then there's some thought that's going to lead to another thought that's going to lead to another thought that's really going to give you a jolt of energy. Those are what they call the third ring thoughts. And I brought in kind of, our solar system as a reminder. So third ring can either mean your first thought is the sun and the third ring thought is the earth, or, your first thought is the earth and the third ring thought is Saturn. But it's that thought that you didn't have, it almost came to you and it gives you energy. For me, it's this idea of chasing exponentials. And what I mean by that is in a sea of data, you've got those small positive anomalies. And if you can just find them, you can learn a fundamental piece of research from all the different positive anomalies. And I realized from doing this mind mapping exercise, that's always been an area of interest for me, is chasing exponentials. So doing this flow mind map gives you kind of these third ring ideas, and I created a thought type called third ring. So if I want, I can look at all of the third ring ideas I had from my 3 different mind maps. And these are all the ideas that kind of give me a jolt of energy. So through that mind mapping, I thought I should get Camtasia, because then I can start creating online, chunks of learning, which is something I really like to do. Becoming a corporate performance coach is a theme that started to emerge from all the tools, chasing exponentials, finding positive anomalies. So these are in one easy, compact place, all of the mind map thoughts that gave me quite a bit of energy. And then the next tool they have you do, and I'm just going to go quickly just so you can get a sense of it, is take those third ring thoughts and write down a mini role on a napkin of something you could do that would cause those third ring thoughts to be the job description. So here's an actual example. There's a napkin, and I wrote, being a research scientist in the area of peak performance or flow is something that I would love to do. And that emerged from those mind maps. And I drew a little sketch of writing papers, chasing the exponential, trying different things, all around researching techniques to create peak performance. So that could be a role for me. And then let me go to the last tool, which is this idea of creating 3 separate Odysseys. And when the authors talk about an Odyssey, basically what they're saying is that we tend to live our life in 2 to 4 year chunks. I find that true for me. If I look back from when I graduated university, I can easily break what I've done in my career or life into these 2 to 4 year chunks. And so what they have you do is write 3 separate 2 to 4 year chunks. So one of them I wrote, again, on this idea of corporate performance coach, which is one of the themes that was emerging through all the previous tools. And I kind of sketched what that 5-year window could look like. And so you'll see in the first year, doing different mind maps like the one we're looking at, doing a research project with a group called the Flow Genome Project. So I'm starting to have all these ideas of what I would do as a corporate performance coach. And if you'll recall, that question I had asked myself about how do I bring my daughter's art into what I do, I basically sent my daughter this sketch and a little description of what I'm trying to do from an Odyssey perspective. And then she created this, which is basically her graphic kind of interpretation of what that Odyssey is. And she loved doing this. And this is something I never would have thought about doing if it wasn't for that design, be curious design mindset and pivot your problem. So now here my daughter is interpreting from an art form perspective what a 2 to 4 year Odyssey of mine from a work perspective could look like. And so having 3 different Odysseys, and again, my sketch, what my daughter drew, this one is all about digital transformation, is I think a perfect way to, in a non-intuitive way, bring my love dashboard up by having this project my daughter and I did together. So in a nutshell, Shelley, I think I've gone through all the tools. If I go back to the very, very top, I can quickly go through what I call the shortcut, which is number 1, start where you are, which are your dashboards. Number 2, use the 5 design mindsets to come up with the right problems. Having the right problems to want to solve is probably one of the most important things you'll do. Build your compass, your life view and your work view. Find where they clash, where they're coherent. Create 3 mind maps of when you're in flow, when you're engaged, when you're energized. Create roles and purposely write them on a napkin. It's a very interesting technique because it adds that level of informality, like you're still playing with the ideas, and then design 3 specific yet different Odysseys for what you could be doing next in your life. And then if I take a look at this, which is if anyone wants to email me, I could even call this, say, step 7, which
I'm
is...
glad you put that out, because a couple people have asked, can we reach out to Omer directly? And I will preface this by, if it's a tech support on the brain or your brain isn't working, please email TheBrain at support.com. But if questions related to this presentation, a number of attendees were interested in getting your contact information as well.
Absolutely, I'd love to hear from them. And there's my email, right? I had it a second ago.
And of course, we can put this out in our follow-up message, guys. So don't worry if you've missed that. And Omer is also on Twitter, so we can also include his Twitter handle if you want to follow him and do more of a public Q&A there as well.
So I do have to say, Shelley, some of the new features that were introduced in version 10, linkable thought types, changing tags on the fly, being able to conjure up all those thought types in an instant, has really, being a user of TheBrain now for over 11 years, has really, yet again, allows me to think really fast and really effectively for the way I like to think. So I found interpreting this book through this mind map an incredibly rewarding exercise. And I think I'm just going to end it at, if I even just look at the things that I've done as a result of reading this book, my next year is kind of already specced out, which is very exciting.
Wow, that is exciting. What a very inspirational example. I love that, because I took strong moments yet when you did Omer's done some past webinars, which in addition to this one will be recorded. For those of you this isn't his first with us, but I've always learned so many little tidbits to add to my ginormous brain as well. So that this has been given a lot of really great ideas for that. Now, I guess we're going to go on to Q&A. Before I do, I know we have 2 minutes on the hour. Omer, do you have another 5 to 10 minutes or 10 minutes or so for additional Q&A beyond the hour? How are we doing for time?
Oh, absolutely. No
okay.
problem at all from my perspective.
Okay, so you're okay. And then attendees, I want to let you know that we do respect your time boundaries. So if any of you do need to leave on the hour, this will be recorded. You will be emailed a link of the recording. But that being said, I'm going to dive into now even more questions that have come in the Q&A panel. And for those of you that can say, obviously we can get a lot more of your questions answered. So I'm going to do that. For a number of questions from Marco as well as Meta. A copy of this brain would be very welcome, says Marco. And Meta's asking, will Omer be sharing this brain as a template?
It would be a pleasure.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great. So, and we know what we can do is, post this online, probably something that we'll get to. I'm not sure if support can get it today, or if not tomorrow, we'll send a link. So we'll do that. And Meta's already commenting, please give Omer our thanks. So lots of thanks coming through. And I'm going to jump back in to more questions now. But the good news is all of you can get a template of this brain. We will also include Omer's contact information. You'll get a recording. So we'll get you all specced up for designing your life and your digital brain. It is very interesting just to comment on combining these formal theories in the brain, how well they work and synergize, because Omer also did a webinar on GTD, getting things done, David Allen, on the David Allen book, and same kind of result where you start mapping out the theory, but then theory moves quickly into reality. And by reality, I mean thoughts in your brain that encompass what you're going to be doing in your life. So in addition to this book, I think a nice takeaway for the users is, I don't know if you're reading any other type of book or you have any kind of management theory or stuff that is in your head, get it into your brain, because once it's there, it becomes actionable, in a way that just isn't possible unless you, want to have I don't know, some sort of post-it note system on your wall of a million things to do. And yes, there's your GTD, and you've done this with a number of books, haven't you?
I have, and with GTD, the reason I really enjoyed doing it with that book, Shelley, is as you just mentioned, the techniques for GTD are very easy to import into the brain and make this your kind of your log of all of your outstanding actions. And now that you can even have checklists in your notes, makes it even more powerful in terms of tracking what you need to get done.
And Jordan is asking, do you take the book notes in the brain while you're reading it or afterward?
So that's a good question, Jordan. And it's one of those things that'll probably change and evolve over time. The way I've done it so far is I kind of summarize the book in my own words as I'm reading it. And this is kind of how I learn about the book. So here's the start of it. This was what I first wrote down. And then I use this as my raw material. So this I can do on the train. I can do when I'm sitting somewhere. I don't need my computer open to do this. And then I bring this into my brain and start building out the rest of it. And so that's how I did this one. If you ask me again for the next one, you might very well get a completely different answer. I don't know, but that's how I did this one.
Excellent. And then Khalil is commenting here, your creation has really been unusual, underlying the extreme flexibility of the brain. Even better, gives us all meaning to the brain. I was always convinced the brain is much more powerful than just a task management solution.
I'm glad to hear that.
Glad to hear that. Yeah. And then Meta is asking, what app is Omer using for note taking?
If you're talking about these notes, that is actually an email. That's literally an email. So what I'll tend to do, and what I didn't really talk about, Shelley, was the brain box, which I'm finding yes. Very, very helpful. So what I'll do is I'll send myself.
And there was a question earlier on about the brain box. I'm just kind of flowing back up to the top too. So yes, go ahead. And if you can comment on the brain box and earlier questions, and I'm going to just tie this into what do you like about the Brain 10 versus the Brain 9? And obviously one of the things in the Brain 10 is the brain box. But any other Brain 9 versus Brain 10, for these users on the call that are maybe transitioning or wondering if they could upgrade, that might be helpful.
Sure. Okay. Well, by far one of my favorite elements of the Brain 10 is the brain box. So you'll see how I brought an email into a file folder on my computer called January 2019. If I then if I right click on the email, go to send to, brain box is an option. So it's gone to the brain box. If I look at, let's say I look at, this is an image I downloaded from a free site. Oh, doesn't look like that'll open. Let me try this one. Here's an image of that. You might have remember seeing this. This is the reminder of flip your passion formula. If I want to bring that into the brain, I just right click, send to brain box. And then when I go to the brain box, here, let me just minimize this panel. When I go to the brain box, I can either bring flip in as a new thought, or I can make an attachment. Let me just make an attachment to my email summaries, and there you go. It's easily here. And if you recall, I want to bring that email into my brain. Here's the email that I clicked on. I just hit plus. It's now in my brain. So the note-taking app was literally email, and that's how easy it is to bring into my brain. Now, in terms of notes that I showed earlier, so the notes panel here is also very useful when I'm taking notes. And again, as I mentioned before, especially if you now have things like checkbox.
Nice. And in terms of earlier on, there's a question that came in. Eric is asking, what is a prototype? So you have a prototype section in this particular brain. Maybe we can review that concept.
Sure. So a prototype is this idea of just build something that you can try that'll give you a whole bunch of information. So for me, conceptually, I view playing drums at the holiday party as a prototype because it was something I was going to try. I was going to try to practice on the commute, stand in front of a bunch of people I work with after not having played drums for 5 years, to see if I really did feel passionate about it, really enjoyed it. B, was I any good at it, or was this a really bad idea? So in a very short period of time, by trying something, you're going to get a lot of data that'll give you an idea of what you want to try next. So that's how I see prototype. Another example for me is the City of London City of London in Ontario, Canada, but I have a soft spot for the City of London, UK, having worked in the UK for 14 months. This is also a prototype. I was asked to do some consulting at the City of London on StrengthsFinder, and doing that half day of consulting is, again, a perfect way to try something to see what I'm going to learn from it. So a prototype is anything you want to try, but it has to be an experiment in real life. It can't just be an idea in my brain. An experiment in real life that's going to give you a lot of data so you can then decide what you want to do next. That's how I interpret prototype.
Fabulous. I love that too. And it also gives you the permission to make mistakes, which I like too, because we're so focused on perfection. So I think I'm going to take that concept, even, motherhood, this or that, like things I'm doing, like it's a prototype. Hey. And then once you say that, it kind of takes a little bit of a burden off your shoulders. You don't have to be perfect. You can make mistakes and move on and do new reiterations. I love that concept. It's great.
Thank you. The authors actually celebrate the point you just made. The authors celebrate the fact that their prototype might fail miserably because the amount of data they're going to get from that is so useful.
Excellent. And now going back to some more pragmatic questions coming in. Pavel is asking, do you use the cloud version, offline, or both?
I use, so you might have even noticed, or I'm not sure, but I have on my 40,000 brain, I have it syncing to the cloud on a regular basis, which I find very, very useful. And then if I open up my computer and I'm not on Wi-Fi, I can still easily open my brain. I would consider that to be the default for me is my brain is constantly syncing to the cloud.
All right, great. So you're using it on your computer and then you sync to the cloud to maybe get access if you need it, or you're using the cloud more as a backup for your brain, would you say?
It's for me, it's more of a backup. So I changed computers recently, and the cloud, having the brain sitting on the cloud, made transferring it to this computer really, really straightforward. So for me, it's peace of mind around backup. I have gone to my brain via the web, but that's a very, very rare for me. But again, now it comes down to personal preference.
Great. And then just in terms of some more pragmatic questions, that one that came in earlier about your display, we see your notes are to the left. Can you talk a little bit about how you've decided to organize where to put the Brain Plex versus your notes, and why that particular display works well for you?
Sure. And again, it's one of those things where there's so many different ways you can configure the brain, and it's through having different setups. I had several different setups in the past, and this one almost emerged. So it's again one of those things, instead of having a strong view of the way I wanted it to look, I kind of trusted continuing to change it until I felt really comfortable with the layout. And so this is just the one that I've evolved to, is I like the notes and the reports kind of on the left, and running the thinking on the right, and having the Plex be the larger part of the screen. And I really rely on dashboards. As you can see, it's very easy for me to get lost in where I might be, and those dashboards are an easy way to get out of it. So it's emerged through personal preference.
Excellent. And then another display question. Noticed Omar has lots of images. You had your paintings as well as zoomable icons. How did you add your images to your brain?
Sure. Let me, that's a great question. So there is many sites where you can download free images. I was just doing this earlier. So let's say here, pick a topic. I heard you mention motherhood, Shelley. So if I type
Sure.
in motherhood, and then, here's a nice image right here. And this is, as you can see, it's a free image. So I save this image. It goes into my January 2019 folder, save. I go to my folder. What was the image called? It was called Mother.
If you're not worried about copyright and stuff, you can also just copy and paste images onto thoughts too. So there's many ways to do this also.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just, for some reason, I like using the brain box this way. So that's kind of how I'm doing it. And now it's
all about the brain box. I love it.
Yeah. And so now that image, so if let me go back to my dashboard, health, be a better support. Let's say that's something I want to work on. And let's say that image that we just discussed is the image that I want to use to remind me. And that's how I do it. And so there it is.
Excellent. And then I assume the paintings that your daughter made, obviously those you've scanned, and then you can take scanned images as a PDF or whatever and then attach them as thoughts. And those were beautiful paintings, by the way.
Thank you.
Compliments on those.
Thank you. The way I did that, actually, because remember, one of the gravity issues is that we don't live in the same city. And so the way I did that, let me just quickly show you, because again, the beauty of this is we put this together relatively recently, but if I go to webinar and I go, so Surya sent me this email, vision number 3.
Love it. That makes nice wallpaper as well.
And you can see, so this, I just got this on Sunday, and then I just clicked on it, saved it as a picture, put it in that same, I just go here, that's where all my things are, call it Vision 3. Here, let me just use Vision Board 1 that's already there. And again, no, I'm not going to do that because that will get rid of the other one. But you can see how easy it is for me to bring it in. So in many ways, I'm able to defy gravity of my daughter living 300 miles away by just, you can see how we did it. And I'll pass on the compliment to her painting.
Yes, many compliments. That's great. And I love how it looks so textured. So having these textured images in your brains, like when you had the note with the penguin. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, that is a very old picture, but that's still the picture I use to remind me to be the best I can. But that was way back when I had hair. So there's one.
Excellent. And that kind of reminds me of your previous seminar on strong moments. And I love, and I guess we do in this brain too, where one of the takeaways I got from Omar, I think this was years ago, was just to have pictures or thoughts that are your strong moments in life to be inspirational, which of course ties into this session on designing your life, just because it gives you that springboard of confidence and empowerment, which, helps you in of course, all kinds of ways. So yes, very nice. Okay, and Pavel, and we're gonna maybe end on a couple more questions too. And Matt, please jump in if I've missed any earlier questions, because there's a lot of questions. Of course, I'm tending to grab the ones that are coming up right in the bottom now. So I guess it does pay to stay into overtime because you're getting a lot of your questions directly answered. Pavel is asking, do you find the timeline useful? Do you use it for projects or GTD?
The timeline, that's a feature of the brain. Yeah, it's I played around with it, and again, just back to the personal preference. So I personally don't use the timeline. I think the way I like to think, I just like to think more. I'm not sure what the word is, but I don't like applying timeline in my
You're
in
more
my mind.
nonlinear, maybe,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
I'm very nonlinear, so I don't use the timeline.
Right, and that's the thing with the brain. Even our different views. There's the timeline, there's the thought types, there's standard view, there's outline view. So it's really, you know, dependent on your preference and your personal way of looking at things. And so there'll be this template, but of course, everyone's designing your life brain will be so different and unique. So, and then, you know, for those of you that are going to be starting to do this, we'd love to hear from you. Send us screenshots or examples, or to the extent you want to publish anything, you know, we can always do a follow-up session and even more of a sharing session where we're looking at each other's brains. So, and then I guess just one final question that I had jotted down earlier that I think is really important. And unless we have anything else, Matt, maybe I'll close the session on this question. The question is, what do you suggest to those people who aren't really sure what their passions are or don't know what they want to do for a living? Because that's coming back, I guess, to the premise of the book for that guidance. What do you suggest for these people? How do they get started?
No, that's a very, very good question. I think that's probably why this course is so popular at Stanford, is so many of us, myself included, if we tried to think about what do I want to do for my next 20 years of my career or the next 30 years of my career, because I plan to work is love for me, so I can easily see myself doing it for 30 years, this is a really important principle, right? Flip the formula. Just start doing a bunch of things and let yourself discover what you love. You'll surprise yourself. And if you do nothing but these 3 mind maps, you keep at it, keep having those ideas, and you'll know the feeling between an idea that you're feeling like you have to have and then ideas that start to come to you. Once those ideas start to come to you, just pay attention to those, because they'll lead you into discovering what your passion is. So don't worry that you're not sure what you want to do. That's the whole point. So do these. Just start mind mapping, and ideas will start to come.
Very good. Excellent. Well, it's been a very loaded session, lots of great insights for life, as well as just little tips and tricks for actually using the software. Now, before I end the session today, Omer, is there any other fundamental concepts, any favorite thoughts, anything else you'd like to share with us?
I think so. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this. It's amazing how fast the time flies when you're doing something that you love. I guess what I would say is, again, I really liked playing around with all of these different linkable thought types, changing tags, things that started life as a thought, then turned into a type, then I changed my mind again. Just keep experimenting. I think this is a beautiful piece of software to allow you to just unfold all the different experiments you want to try. And I'm excited for you, because at some point you're going to discover something about yourself that's going to trigger something that you didn't realize was there. And so just keep playing around with it. And don't get married to any layout. Don't get married to any thought. Don't get married to anything. Be ready to change any aspect of it.
That is true, and it's those aha moments that really just make it very powerful. Well, Omer, thank you so much for all the insights, the wisdom, and sharing your brain and your very intimate portraits and paintings. It's all been wonderful, and of course, catnip to even advanced users like myself. And it goes to show you can learn from any level of brain user. So we'll hope to have more. And just to let you know, speaking of not to be married to any concept or, you know, how things evolve, we are doing a session, Matt's doing a session on February 13th, evolving and changing your personal brain. So if you need to learn a little bit more about the mechanics of linking and unlinking do join us for that. And of course, if you're a new user and you just downloaded the software and you're wondering, wow, how do I get to where Omar is? You might want to start off with our Personal Brain 101 course. We specifically did not cover the basics of how to get started because we had so many more broad-reaching concepts that we wanted to utilize Omar for. But that being said, on Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, join us for our Brain 101 classes. They're always live, and every question does get answered and demoed in that class, so feel free to do that. And then, Matt, any other questions from the Q&A gallery that we may have overlooked, or have we covered most of them? Matt's on mute, but I think he's saying we might have covered most of them, but I see his smile, and we have to have at least a few little hiccups in the webinar. We can't end the call, so. I think we've covered most of them. Are you hearing anything, Omar?
No, I'm not hearing anything either. It's nice to see him smiling. Unfortunately,
yeah. Okay. I think the smile means we've covered it all. David on the Q&A is joking. Don't get married, and he's smiling, and that was the comment back to your question about not being married to the thought. So now we're just being fun and having everyone's being silly on the call. So I think with that, we're going to close today's session. Omar, thank you so much for your time, your thought, and your generosity in sharing your brain. And we look forward to circling back with you on some of your other brain creation endeavors. And we'll work with you to get the prototype online. And I think with that, I'll let you have final words, and we'll close the session out today.
Well, thank you for that, Shelley. That's very kind of you, and I really appreciate this. I really enjoyed the partnership. So I guess my closing thoughts are: you saw my email. Please, think nothing of sending me an email. I'm glad to give you my response. Reach out, start experimenting. Email me if you have questions, and I look forward to you designing the rest of your life. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you.